Well, hello and welcome back to Supposedly Fun. My name is Greg. I am here today to talk about this book, The Glass Hotel by Emily St. John Mandel. I have kind of gotten away from doing individual reviews of books. I've been more doing like wrap-ups where I talk about a couple of books at once. I thought it would be fun to do one of them again, especially because I feel like there's a bit to talk about with this book. This was a buddy read that I did with Britta Böhler from the second shelf, and it was a lovely buddy read. Sometimes it's nice to do a buddy read with somebody where they have the opposite opinion of you, and that kind of challenges your perception of the book that you're reading. Sometimes it's nice to have a buddy read where the person just kind of agrees with you and kind of affirms the opinion of the book that you are already having and adds layers to it. And this was the latter. Basically, we both just did not like this book. I don't think Britta has posted anything about this yet. I will put a link to her channel down below, and you should watch for it because I'm a fan of her channel, and I'm sure when if she posts something about this, she'll have a lot of really great, intelligent things to say. So let's get into the book. The Glass Hotel is Emily St. John Mandel's fifth book, I believe. Yes, she has 4 previous novels. She is most known as the author of Station 11, which was published a few years ago and kind of quietly built, mostly through word of mouth, from my memory at least, to become something of not really a cult favorite. I think it's a little too broad to have that title, but it's certainly a known and very well-liked book. It was the first book that I read in the year 2019, one of the first books that I reviewed on my channel. I'll put my review of it down below. Just please know that if you do watch it, it was one of my first videos, so please don't hold that against me. So I read Station 11 at the beginning of last year. If you don't want to watch the whole video, I'll just tell you. I thought it was fine. I like Emily St. John Mandel's writing, but I think Station 11 suffered from Emily St. John Mandel wants everything in Station 11 to tie back to this one event. There are a bunch of different storylines and characters, but they all have to tie back to the opening scene of Station 11, in which an actor named Arthur Leander, I believe, dies of a heart attack on stage during a performance of, I believe it was Macbeth or King Lear. I think it was King Lear. Yes, it was King Lear, because there's an actress who was playing one of his daughters as a child who was on stage when that happens, and she's a character later in the book. Anyway, that same night, a pandemic of a flu breaks out and starts, basically, you jump ahead and the world is basically in tatters. It's a shadow of its former self, and people are kind of living on the fringe. Society has collapsed. And all of these different storylines are connected through Arthur Leander, and I thought that it just worked too hard to make those connections, and I feel like the book would have been more meaningful if Emily St. John Mandel had allowed herself to stray from that a little bit. Like, not everything needed to tie back to Arthur Leander, and yet everything does, and it was exhausting after a while. So I enjoyed the book, but I had a lot of problems with it. This one, oh boy, I just didn't like it. And I gave it 2 stars on Goodreads, and the thing about this book is it's the level of bad where it's just a void. And that sounds really harsh, but that's how I feel. Hey, there's nothing offensive in this book. There's nothing really markedly bad. Somebody could certainly read this book and not have any strong opinion about it at all, and I think that's part of the problem. It's just a void. Honestly, and I know Britta felt the same way, I don't think I'm even going to remember this book by the end of the year. It's one of those things where it's just I fully expect it to fade from my memory within about a week. There's just nothing really super memorable in it. Another thing Britta and I both commented on a lot was that it feels like a debut novel that has a lot of ideas and no idea how to handle them. And that's kind of shocking, because there are a lot of different story elements in Station 11, and Emily St. John Mandel manages them. So part of me almost wants to come up with this outlandish conspiracy theory where this is like a manuscript she was working on way back in the day and just kind of brought it out to be published, because it feels very much like a debut novel from an author who hasn't figured out what they're doing but has a lot of ideas. And I know that sounds really harsh, but that's, again, how I feel. let's go to the blurb, because I think the blurb will reveal part of my problem with the book. And by the way, from here on out, as I discuss the book, I'm going to get into light spoilers. I won't say anything major. If I do, I'll warn you in advance. But so from up to this point, no spoilers. Once I start discussing the plot of the book, there will probably be light spoilers. I'm going to try to keep everything to things that are revealed within the first 50 to 75 pages, but just FYI. So let's talk about the blurb of the book. An exhilarating tale of colliding worlds, The Glass Hotel takes readers from the wilds of Vancouver Island to the skyscrapers of New York. In the glittering intersections of two seemingly disparate events, a massive Ponzi scheme collapse and the mysterious disappearance of a woman from the deck of a ship at sea, Emily St. John Mandel paints a breathtaking portrait of greed and guilt, love and delusion, and the infinite ways we search for meaning in our lives. So here's the thing. It's setting this up as like there's a Ponzi scheme and a woman who disappears off of a boat. Somehow these things are going to be connected. Except that's not a mystery. It's not a mystery at all. You find out right on the first page of the book the identity of the woman who disappears off the boat. Her name is Vincent. This is the first page of the book. Within 50 pages, Vincent is in a relationship with a man named Jonathan Alkaitis. Jonathan Alkaitis is the man who is running the Ponzi scheme. So within 50, there's no mystery here. It's not, there's no, these events are not seemingly disparate at all. They are inextricably linked through Vincent. Vincent is the tie. And I feel like what's happening is that like the marketing team is kind of looking at this book and saying, look, well, like nothing really happens. So it feels like they're trying to put a there, and it's just not there when you get into the book. It's kind of misleading about that, which is fine. But I feel like, so let's just get into it. So it opens with Vincent falling off of the ship. And then we get to Paul, this man named Paul, and he's telling a story from the present about a time in the 1990s. And here's the thing. Paul then disappears and does not come back until the very end of the book. He kind of makes an appearance in the middle of the book in part 2, but he is not actually telling the story. Somebody sees what he's doing at that time and kind of comments on it. He's not actually present in the book again until the end. And you can make a case that, so Paul is Vincent's brother. You can make a case that he then becomes the personal connection that brings it back around to like the family and home and something like that, except you don't know who he is anymore. And there's this bizarre device where as he's telling the story, all of a sudden he'll make an aside to his therapist in the present day. So you know he's telling his, but it's bizarre, it feels jarring, it doesn't work, and then that method of storytelling disappears for the rest of the book. It's only in that one part. And then you go to Vincent, and then and Paul, at a certain point, Vincent is his half sister, and he flops out of college and he goes home to try to lick his wounds and get back on his feet. Vincent is at that point troubled because her mother has just recently disappeared. She gets suspended from school, and everyone is talking about her getting suspended from school as if it's like the worst thing in the world, and she wrote graffiti on a window at school with an acid marker, and everybody's talking about this like it's the worst thing anybody could do. And maybe I'm a jaded New Yorker, but I just remember thinking, she wrote on a window. Everybody calm down, and I think that's something that happens throughout the book. Emily St. John Mandel talks about things as if they have these enormous stakes, and I just never felt the stakes of them at all. And it feels like it's something like that. It seems like, is this a big deal? Am I just not understanding what's happening? And then I start thinking, well, I bet Vincent is actually grieving that her mother disappeared. She doesn't know where her mother is. So everybody's probably dancing around the real issue, and they just don't want to talk about it. So they're making a big deal about her getting suspended because they don't want to talk about it. But there's nothing in the book that would support that. And I feel like when it comes to instances like this in the book, I'm trying to do exactly what the blurb of the book is doing. I'm trying to graft meaning onto the book that isn't there. And that's the problem, ultimately. So from this beginning section, like I said, Paul disappears. We switch to the perspective of Vincent for the most part. She ends up living with Jonathan Alkaitis. Why? I don't know. It's this bizarre arrangement where they act as if they're married. She even wears a wedding ring, but they're not married. And again, that's not a spoiler. It all happens in the first 100 pages of the book. And then this was something I noticed, but Britta pointed out to me. Once she said it, it really made a lot of sense. You are repeatedly told that, as Vincent is telling the story about her life with Alkaitis, you're repeatedly told this was leading up to him getting arrested for the Ponzi scheme. And it's like there were 3 months left and blah, blah, blah. And it's like, is this trying to create suspense? What's this happening? I know, I get it. He's going to be arrested at the end of 2008. You don't need to keep telling me. And it feels clumsy. And that part is fine. But that kind of problem repeats. In another instance, Jonathan Alkaitis' secretary has only been on the job for 3 months when he is arrested. She's a minor character in the book. And somebody tells her, this whole experience is just an anecdote that you're going to be telling at parties in 20 years. And that's fine. But then the book jumps ahead and shows the secretary admin in 20 years telling the whole story as an anecdote. And we didn't need that, but we're constantly reminded and over-told about things in the book. And it just feels so clumsy. It's like, it assumes that this character of the admin really meant something, and she doesn't. There are too many characters in this book. There are too many storylines in this book. It's really fractured. Nothing means anything. I don't know what this book is ultimately trying to be about. Is it a story about Vincent? Is it a story about Vincent and her brother? Is it a story about a Ponzi scheme? Is it a story about the employees who got suckered into conspiring with the Ponzi scheme? Because they get a whole section of the book to themselves as well. There's a section of the book where Jonathan Alkaitis is in prison and losing his grip on reality, and he starts seeing ghosts of people who have died, some people who committed suicide in the wake of the Ponzi scheme's collapse. So you start thinking, okay, well, he's losing his grip on reality. But then other people start seeing ghosts as well. And you start thinking, okay, well, is this a ghost story? What's happening? And ultimately, you're constantly told that things are important, but you don't see why things are important. And Emily St. John Mandel will add things to try to illustrate a point that sometimes didn't need to be illustrated at all. And even if it's helpful to the book, she assumes there's an importance there or an emotional resonance that just isn't. For instance, she adds a character who has this tie to Jonathan Alkaitis that this feels kind of inexplicable. She knew his brother before his brother, I won't go into the connection, but she knew his brother. And she later becomes one of the people who invests in the Ponzi scheme and is at risk of losing everything. So I get what Emily St. John Mandel is doing. She has this character because it shows the personal side and the sort of ruthlessness of it, that even this person who's allegedly a personal friend of Jonathan Alkaitis is someone he's taking advantage of. Or simultaneously thinks that he is helping as he takes advantage of her, because it feels like there's an element of this book that shows the duality of intention, and that is the most interesting thing about the book. Unfortunately, it just doesn't build to anything, and it starts to feel like, again, I'm trying to graft meaning onto a book that just really is only half there in that case. But anyway, so she helps illustrate the personal side. Then when the Ponzi scheme collapses, you see her reaction to it, and it's nice to have that. But then she appears again in the ending in this, no spoilers, I won't get into it, but she appears again in this role that assumes you have this really deep emotional connection, or that another character had a really deep emotional connection to her. And it doesn't make sense. It doesn't land. At least it didn't for me, because it's just not there. And Emily St. John Mandel assumes that it's there. And she has another character who was an investor in the Ponzi scheme come back later in the book so that he can also be kind of morally corrupted or find himself in an ethical dilemma. So she can And I get what she's doing. She's trying to illustrate that seemingly good people, even people who have been wronged, can also find themselves in situations where they could be led astray or do wrong. I get what she's doing. However, she's already illustrated that several times because, as I mentioned, the people who participate in the Ponzi scheme at Jonathan Alkaitis' company have their own section of the book. And they wrestle with that very idea. So we didn't need this person to come back and illustrate this point. They didn't mean anything to the story anyway. There's another part where someone writes graffiti on the window of the titular hotel. And everybody's reaction to it is like, oh my God, what? This is like the worst thing that's ever happened. But the graffiti was, why don't you swallow glass or something like that? And everybody's like horrified. And maybe I'm a jaded New Yorker. I just remember thinking, what? It's not a racist term. It's not a specific death threat or anything like that. Why is everybody so bent out of shape about what was written on this window? I don't get it. And moments like that happen a lot because, as I said, instead of building suspense, Emily St. John Mandel keeps telling you, "Oh, this is a momentous thing," but it just doesn't feel momentous. And ultimately, I don't even really know what this is about. The title seems to point to the Glass Hotel, but the Glass Hotel is kind of a minor location in the book. It's certainly not any more of an important location than several other locations in the book. So again, is it trying to point back, because the Glass Hotel is on that Vancouver island, which is where Vincent and Paul are from. So is it trying to point back to a sense of home and family? Or is it something else? I feel like you could easily rename this book The Counterlife and it would mean just as much. So there's not much about the Glass Hotel that feels like, why is it getting this significance of the title? I honestly don't know. Britta didn't really know either. It's just inexplicable. I don't get it. I don't get it. Was there anything else about the Glass Hotel that I would want to talk about to end this rant? I don't think so. I've probably talked about it enough. I can see where somebody could kind of coast along with this book and enjoy it. For me, everything just felt totally inexplicable, like a void. And I wonder where the editor was, because it needs to be if I was the editor of this book and you gave this to me as a manuscript, I would tell the author, pick one of these storylines and make that your book, but you can't do all of them. And I wonder if the success of Station 11 made, say, an editor more willing to go along with something like that, because clearly it worked in Station 11. People loved it. So sure, do a sprawling book with a bunch of different storylines that kind of interlock and relate to each other in ways that are unnecessary. But for me, oh God, you could remove the entire middle of the book. There are 3 parts in the book. Part 2, you could pretty much delete from the book. There are maybe 2 or 3 relevant things that happen as linking devices for part 3, but otherwise you could just take it out, and I think that's a huge problem. So I would say it's a candidate to be on my worst reads of 2020, except honestly I probably won't even remember that I read this by the end of the year. So, and like it's inoffensively bad, it's just bad to me. So it's hard to really work up any kind of strong emotion either way. But yeah, I can't recommend it. I'd say if you're interested in this, maybe if you haven't read Station 11, go read Station 11 instead. If you've already read Station 11, look for another book to suit your purposes. Maybe pick up Jenny Ofel, either Department of Speculation or Weather. Try those. I haven't read Weather yet, but I've heard really good things about it, and I'm looking forward to reading it. This, to me, is just a mess, and I know at least Britta agrees with me. So, if you've read The Glass Hotel and you think differently, I'd love to hear you defend this book. If you have any thoughts about any of the critiques or things that I have said in this, please feel free to drop that in a comment down below as well. If you have recommendations that people can read instead of this, put that down below. Mine, I'm going to stick with Jenny Ofel for now. If I think of any others, I'll put them down in the comments as well. And anyway, thank you for your time watching this video. If you've gotten this far, you're the best. If you're a subscriber, you're even more the best. And as always, I will be back, hopefully with some better reading. Until then, happy reading.